Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Hancock. So, this, of course, is a superhero movie that is to have fun with the genre. We have here that they're very one of a kind, like superhero-esh like films that may not even have people with powers, but they tend to have fun and run with this kind of movie. And I can't help but also like have Hancock really playing up the fact of like, well, what if you had a certain kind of Superman, but this Superman is to not be this happy-go-lucky guy that's truth and justice and American way, but instead is to be this guy who is to be this unreliable drunk that is to go on and have people kind of poke him with a stick to tell him like, hey, crime is going on, and he couldn't be bothered because he's like, really, this again? Like, good God, like, can't just somebody just like stop this kind of thing, stop crime? Come on, like, why do I always have to kind of go through and take care of business? So, really, I would say for this one, for this movie, I can have fun watching this film. It's still actually a pretty funny film. I've watched this more than once. I think the most hilarious thing for me is always the good job. Say it, good job. Good job. Good job. Like, I find that freaking hilarious. But I think with this movie, the longer you go with this film, the weaker it gets, in all honesty. Like, this movie doesn't have a good enough story, but it has an intriguing enough story to keep you interested. And plus, it doesn't feel like a copy and pasting thing from this film. But there is some showcasing of power that needs to, of course, to be shown here. But it's kind of like a very common breakdown where it feels like this guy only really just has super strength and to be able to fly, and that seems about it. Like, I don't see any other kind of thing that they need to showcase more here. And also he can seem to live forever, so like those are like kind of superpowers. He's like bulletproof, he's invulnerable, so to speak. So yeah, like we have kind of a Superman character here without actually the laser eyes or the freezing breath, but everything else seems to be, of course, similar to a Superman-esque like character, but he doesn't have a weakness to some rock somewhere. And it's kind of funny because Ray's character, who's Jason Bateman's character, is to mention like, well, hey, like, you didn't come here off of some like alien spaceship, did you? And of course John is like, no, I just woke up at some hospital someday. So now I think it's about the time to go on and explain this movie a little bit, going up into the tee-up version of it. So yeah, funny movie, fun film, and just kind of gets weaker by the longer it goes on, because there just isn't much of a real villain in this story. And so where can you go to also watch this movie? It seems like right now there's a plenty of apps that you can dare in fact watch this, but there's kind of a pay to go in them kind of thing where you can rent certain movies, like an Amazon or a Vudu, VUDU. You can kind of rent this movie if you have the bucks, if you have the dollarinos. It's probably going to be a couple. You might have this movie in your collection, because I probably would, because I find this movie fun. Even though it's a weak film, it's still fun. So I can also recommend a free option for those of you that have this thing called Google. You can probably Google search a number of apps. I would recommend going through a Google Play Store and search the word movie apps and just kind of scroll down and start to like maybe check to see if there might be an app for you that you can conveniently go on and find a number of movies and stuff like that. Every once in a while, you'll find in the Google store probably like a movie or an app called like TV Crush, or you might be able to find certain kind of random uh, movie apps that might have a movie conveniently. Like, ooh, like this movie is on here. Oh, okay, so like I don't have this in my collection, so I can go and randomly watch this. But you can go into a Google search and find a number of apps that there, in fact, you can find a ton of movies for absolutely free. You can go into an app called Letter C Movies, which is a letter and a word. You can go and search this app to dare, in fact, download this app. Go out of your way to say that you can see any number of things, shows, movies, absolutely free. You could also go Google search an app called Fox HD Movies, and you can go out of your way to see that the logo will say Fox HD Movies, but the title will say like Play 1080p HD. That's all, folks. And be able to, with the combination of those two apps, be able to pretty much be able to see anything. By and large, I've used these two apps fairly reliably, and at the end of the day, I can watch almost anything with a combination of those apps. With also TV Crush, because every once in a while TV Crush can have a movie subtitled or a show subtitled that I would need subtitled because it's not in English. So, or there's parts of the movie that isn't in English. So every once in a while I'll bump into that. So with that said, I am going to go out of my way to say it is about that customary time to tee this up. What is this movie about? So we have, of course, Ray that is desperately trying to get this thing called a all heart thing together, wanting a lot of companies to donate certain products of theirs for free for a certain part of time. And a lot of people are thinking that this guy is absolutely insane. But we have, of course, Ray here that is trying to get this all heart thing like started. And so Ray is to one day need to be able to be rescued because he, of course, is between two cars and a train is coming with his car just kind of parked in the middle of this train crossing. And so we go on and have Ray getting saved by John, and all of a sudden John is like, hey, like, you know what, if you ever really need some advice about like how I can help you, because like it seems like people hate you and I want to eventually like turn that around. I want people to like love you and clap whenever you appear, because like I want you to be happy, and it just seems like you're miserable. So like I want to fix that. I want to have you be a much happier person. But once Hancock is to start to visit Ray, it seems like John is to have some weird feeling about, of course, Ray's wife. Which sounds weird, but it seems like Mary is really to be giving John like some kind of weird sense of something, and so John is to have to go and figure out what exactly that is. So yeah, like that's kind of the base of the movie. John at some points goes on and fights common crime, and so eventually that escalates to him going to prison forcibly and him needing to go back out of prison for good behavior and defend the city, because crime is at an all-time high when John is in prison. And so when John goes off to defend the city, then crime is to, of course, go down. So with that said, let's go into that just double five, and let's otherwise just go and further on talk about this film and go into spoilers. So it's spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time we need to spoil this movie. So we, of course, at the very beginning of this film have John, who, of course, is just kind of sleeping on some bench somewhere. He's like, blah. He is, of course, having numerous bottles of whatever alcoholic beverage. It's to be like this big, massive thing that's like the size of his head as far as this bottle is concerned. And so all of a sudden, this kid is to kind of wake up John. You're going to realize through most of this movie, not a lot of people have a lot of actual names in this movie. So this kid is to wake up John and tell him, like, hey, John, because I don't want to say his actual last name all that often, because who knows with YouTube. So this kid goes on and it's mentioned, like, hey, bad guys. And John is just like, okay, great. What do you want me to do about it? And so the kid just walks off and calls him an a-hole. And so John grabs a bottle of one of his things of hooch and is to fly off to find these car thieves that are in a chase with the police officers, and it seems like there's nothing they can do. So John goes on and flies to find this car, is to rip off the hood of the car, and is to sit in the car. And John's like, you know what? I get it. You guys are like listening to loud music. You guys are having a fun time here. But like, here's the thing. Like, you guys need to stop this car right now, or your head is ending up in his butt. Your head is ending up in his butt, and you drew the short straw, so your head is going in my butt. We're really having to censor ourselves for this movie, for how many numerous times that, of course, John, for this being a PG-13 film, man, does he swear a lot. Weirdly enough. So, John, of course, is having these guys, like, they're talking in their own language to one another. And so John is like, you know what? Like, I'm tired of you guys, like, not listening to him. Because, like, I swear to Christ, like, I'm gonna make you guys stop. So we go on and we just have John, who breaks through the kind of the floor of this car to then have his feet basically be slowing down this car while his feet are technically dragging through this freeway. And so we then go on and have like John realizing that this car isn't really going to stop, or these guys don't realize what he's doing here. So eventually, of course, we have this pattern where consistently John is to get either insulted by a criminal, or he just starts getting really irritated by them kind of not following what he, of course, is to want them to do. So finally he just decides to pick up this car and lift this car, and all of a sudden we end up finding out that all these guys actually do speak English, and he's like, oh, you speak English now, huh? And then like, so all of a sudden, because these guys go and shoot John up, and it breaks his sunglasses, and like he ends up just having bullet holes all over him, so he gets really upset about that. So John goes and lifts up this car, and they're of course desperately saying like, hey, put us down, and John is mentioning about his sunglasses being broken. And this guy's like, well, hey, here's my Ray-Bans. Like, take my Ray-Bans from one of the car thieves. So John goes on and is to lift this car and is to chuck this car and place it onto the Capitol Records building. And so we, of course, have uh, after this whole event is all over, like nobody's really thanking John for doing this by stopping these thieves. All they can go on in the news is mention how like millions of dollars of damage that John has now gone on to uh, with uh, with this little stunt here. And so we go on and we have John making his way to a place called the Primetime Pub and just trying to uh, kind of hide himself into a bar where all of a sudden we end up finding this woman who seems to be a fan of John and has been kind of stalking him around to try to find him to eventually try to maybe be able to either sleep with John or ask him about his superpowers or be able to maybe fly with John, because it seems that she is tempted to want to fly here, and John is like, well, here's the thing, like if you fly with me, you're probably going to wear a helmet, or otherwise your skin is just going to start to fall off. It's like, oh my god. So this woman who's a fan is to drive John back to his place, and so she goes into the trailer with him and notices he just has some like Jiffy Pop, and so she's going on like, ooh, like what do you got here? And he's like, oh, that's Jiffy Pop. They're like, oh, Jiffy Pop? And he's like, yeah. So excuse me. So we go on here and we have John, who of course is to tell this lady that since they're going to be in the throes of passion, because it seems like this girl really wants it, John mentions to her that at some point he's going to shout the word mountaintop. And when he shouts the word mountaintop, this girl better be like away uh, from his Johnson. So we go on and we have eventually them going at it. And so John is to shout the word mountaintop, mountaintop, mountaintop. And so this girl is to be pushed off of John for all of a sudden for there to have multiple holes going through this trailer. And this woman is like, oh my god. And so John is just like, well, yeah, like sorry, but like, you wouldn't have, you really wouldn't have wanted any of that. So this girl goes off and is kind of in another room, kind of getting ready, like putting her clothes back on. I guess she's in a bathroom, and so John is convincing this woman. It's like, well, hey, like, how about you, like, you and me, like, we can go and, like, I'll show you flight. Like, I'll show you how I fly. But as John is to kind of just check on this girl, he realizes that she's actually gone. Thinking she went to the bathroom, but actually she just went to sneak out of here to get out of this place because I guess she wanted something she couldn't exactly get, and so she just decided to leave here, or she just got so scared of this guy that she left, that maybe she was worried that he could probably break her or hurt her or any number of things by accident. So we go on here and we transition to, of course, have a guy named Ray, who we find out is desperately trying to get this company or this thing called an all heart campaign going. So he goes to this drug company called Pharmatoxis, and he is to realize that they are to be this a multi-million-dollar company or billion-dollar company, whatever, these corporate fat cats and whatever, that are to have this drug called Mycotin that they're pushing right now. So Mike goes into this pitch, and guys are calling him the Bono of PR, and Ray is saying like, well, Bono is the Bono of PR. Like, so Mike goes into this business and is to mention about the All Heart campaign, and for their one drug that is to be Mycotin to go on and sell this drug for absolutely free. And these executives are like, say what? Like, everybody is immediately going on and like, well, like, no. Like, you would just want us to just hate money at this point. But we also have these guys who are going on and saying like, well, like if we did that, there would be a number of drug side effects that we'd have to be worried about. And no, no. To where they go on and they ask if Mike is, or if Ray is to like be on drugs, or if he's like insane or whichever. And so Mike goes and realizes that this was a mistake, and so he goes on and calls Mary and tells her, yeah, there's no way that these guys are interested in this, and get ready for some spaghetti tonight, because I desperately need some meatball madness into me, or whatever he ends up saying, like spaghetti madness, because evidently they have a certain week where they go and have meatballs, and it seems like all they do in this movie actually is to just have meatballs, but I guess this is reserved for one day of the week, but it just seems like every week is to be that week. I don't know. Like, you would have thought probably a lot of these characters are like, yeah, man, I was so sick of eating meatballs in this film. Probably what they were going to tell you there. So we have Ray here, who is stuck in traffic, and he conveniently is also parked his way to this railroad crossing where he's right on the tracks, and this train is a-coming. And so he's honking at these other cars, telling them like, hey man, like this train is coming, like I need you to just move, and they can't, so he's stuck. And so all of a sudden the train is coming, and so like Ray here is trying to scramble out of his car, and so by that time we end up having John appear here and kind of knocking on the I realize I said John ripped off the hood. What I meant to say was John was to rip off the roof of the car. The roof of the car. What was I saying? Because the hood is the very front part of the car. What was I thinking? The roof of the car. What was I saying? So now I corrected that, because heaven forbid I know my my car words. So John is to kind of knock on the hood of the car here, and is now deciding to go and lift this car up and flip it over and then smash into this train with his body. And all of a sudden, all of the cars that are behind this train are now just like pummeling all out. And John is like, oh my God. So all of a sudden, everybody's stopping what they're doing, getting out of their car to now just be again mad at John here. And so they're saying crap to him, and he's saying crap to them back about like, hey man, we should sue you. And John is saying like, well, you should sue McDonald's, because man, did they F you up. Like, and he's being so rude to them, and so Ray is to go on and say, like, well, hey, like, I was technically saved here. John just saved my life. And you know what? Like, John, thank you. So we have, of course, Ray desperately asking John if there's any way that he's going to be flying over by the valley where his home is, and so we have, of course, like this neighborhood that all of a sudden has a car being dropped, and so the car is dropped right in the street, and Ray is like, "Well, I the driveway would have been nicer." So Ray gets out of the street, and so John just kind of drags the car to the parking lot and then drops it. So, which I think there's so much about this stuff that is like this very cool looking visual that they're doing with this stuff. So, we now have Ray like asking like John like, "Hey, come in, like have a dinner with us." Uh, and just kind of meet the family. And so it's meatball night. Like, you saved my life. How about a good home cooked meal kind of thing? So John goes in there and, of course, is to kind of just uh, eat his spaghetti and meatballs. And so we, of course, have Mary's character who's going on and obviously just doesn't like John's character. Just kind of saying it's like, well, like, you're going to be a guy that's just going to destroy things and hurt people and so on and so forth. And we have at one point where John is calling Aaron boy, and Mary, of course, is to correct him by saying, like, no, his name is Aaron. And John goes like, hey, your mother's calling you. So I was like, ugh. So we have John going on and eating the spaghetti. He's like, good meatball. Like, yeah. So at the end of this whole meal, it seems that Aaron is a big fan of John, and to the point where when Ray is to convince John, it's like, well, hey, like, you know what? I'm a PR guy. Like, here's my pitch. Like, I want to help you. It seems that no one likes you, so, like, I want to make people like you. And we all of a sudden have Aaron go in the background, like, I like you, John. They're like, hey, there's one fan right there. So Ray's to say, it's like, well, hey, take this card, and you know what? Like, if you want to go on and feel differently about your life, then come to me, and we'll change that. We'll help you. So John is just kind of like looking at another bottle of booze, like looking at another like just meaningless existence of a life, and so John goes back to the valley to go and talk to Ray, and once he drops, because he heavily drops, he creates some kind of a destruction upon this road where Ray is like, hey, like, could you not land so hard, like, on the street? And John was like, oh, that was like that before I got here. And Ray's like, dude, I know these streets. It's kind of like the Ted movie, where Ted is like, let me see if you know these streets. So John, when he lands before he meets Ray, is all of a sudden seeing this one kid. And so both Mary and Ray were talking to John last night about how Aaron is kind of dealing with this bully at school called Michelle, who's a guy that has a girl's name because he's French. And so John is telling, of course, Aaron, like, well, hey, man, like, you just hit him with his leg where the sun don't shine, and this and that. Like uh, you just hit him in the God, what did he call it? Uh, the basically his junk. Just hit him in the junk, and then he'll never be able to do anything with that again. Like he'll just use it as a flap to keep the crack of his butt uh, from getting dust on it or whatever. So we have John, who all of a sudden meets with this kid who just so happens to be Michelle. And so this kid ends up calling him an a-hole over and over again, and calls Aaron an a-hole also. So John's like, you know what? I don't really like that word. Like, if you could just stop saying that word. But then the kid just keeps on saying it. So he's like, call me an a-hole one more time. So the kid is like, eh. And so John goes and chucks him into the air. And so John is just kind of looking up, just kind of seeing where he's going to land. And then so all of a sudden Ray's like, oh, hey, John, you came back. Oh, great, buddy. So all of a sudden, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever, John just catches Michelle. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, shouldn't this kid just be dead from the impact? Like, how is it that John just catches this kid and he's okay? It seems just kind of goofy, but movie magic, I guess. So John goes on and talks to Ray, and so Ray is like, well, you know what? I'm going to put on some of your blunders. Like, I'm going to put on some like stuff that people have eventually seen and recorded, and it's on YouTube. So we now go on and we have the scene of which where we had John going on and finding this one, I'm assuming like humpback whale, that's what it looks like to me, kind of on this beach, and it now needs to desperately go back into, of course, its ocean. And so John comes in and is to take this whale called Walter and take this whale, I guess, at this uh, Sycamore Cove Beach and chuck this whale and have it accidentally smack into this boat. Because of all the places that John could have taken this whale, he chucks the thing and it hits a boat conveniently. So we also have a scene where John is desperately going into this one ice cream truck and just taking a bunch of ice cream and just quickly eating it. And so now Ray is like, you're almost like without clothes here. And John's like, well, have you ever put out a house fire, Ray? And Ray's like, no. It's like, well, like I was hot. So this guy fighting crime basically without clothes on. So we just go on and just have Ray just continue to kind of belittle John here and just calling him, you know what? You know what people see you as? An a-hole. I don't want to say it. And John was like, whoa, like you better not call me that. And like Ray's like, well, yeah, like that's what everybody sees you as, and I just want to change that. And so Ray goes on and to show numerous comic books and asks John what he sees there. And John's like, well, a homo. And Norwegian homo. Like, well, I got you there. But, like, this guy is not wearing a costume. This guy doesn't have a uniform to go on and fight crime. He doesn't have a disguise. He doesn't have anything. He's just kind of the random guy who comes out there and is to just kind of, like, you would think, like, this guy would probably have a number of sponsorship if, like, he would basically be like Captain Amazing from Mystery Man, where Captain Amazing has like a number of sponsors like Pepsi and all these kind of. You would think that eventually they would have that, because in a real world situation, you would think that John would have like sponsorship up to Yin Yang, because it seems like they're heading to that direction. So John now is back with his family, and so Mary is mentioning that John seems like a guy who just breaks things. And so now, once he's back with this family, we're showcasing a video of a news anchor who, of course, is to be Stacey Grace, who is to mention that John is not above the law, and that there should be somebody somewhere breaking down this guy's door to arrest him for all of the hefty amount of destruction and collateral damage that he has left in his wake of just fighting crime. So we go on and we have Ray is like, well, yeah, look at that. Like, we have like people saying that like they want to arrest you, and John's like, well, they can try. So we have Ray who's like, well, you know what if we give him that? What if you get arrested? What if you go to prison to just show these people that you've changed, that you're a different person, and then they'll go on and they'll clamor for you. They'll desperately want you to be released so you can fight their crimes that they can't fight. So John is going on and doing this press conference where he's going on and having this stand here. And so he's going on and telling everybody that he's like, well, like, I am going to go on and let myself be arrested because I'm not like any of you, and so like he's apologizing, and he's like, well, hey, I can be better, I will do better, and that he's going to go through drug and alcohol rehabilitation. And then he starts looking at Ray, and Ray's like, yeah, like, so, like, yeah, go on and do it, buddy. Like, because, like, clean yourself up. And so Ray goes on and gets arrested, or Ray gets arrested. John gets arrested and goes into prison. And so he goes into rehab, where we of course have every single time they're asking him, it's like, well, hey John, do you want to say anything? Do you want to talk? And he's like, pass. To where every single time he goes in there, he's like, pass. And to where there's one guy who ends up kind of mentioning that like being in prison is tough, and then one guy is to kind of mention about this guy's ugly face when he looks at himself in the mirror. And so it seems like these guys are having just an argument with one another. So, but John always comes in and passes until the very last day. He's like, well, I do drugs or I do alcohol and stuff. And like, good, like you did something, clap, clap, clap. Yeah, like he finally like spoke up, even when they're just kind of irritated when he always passes all the time. But so John goes in there, and immediately he is to be met by a bunch of inmates, and John has realized a number of those guys he had put in there himself. He's like, oh, I get what this is. Like, this is my comeuppance for like putting all you guys away. And they're like, well, yep. So he's like, well, hey, like, do any of you guys really want to ride this train? And they're like, choo choo, a-hole. So we go on and we have John, who is to immediately take one of the inmates and put the other inmate, his head up his butt, to just showcase them. It's like, well, yeah, like, you guys do not want to mess with me, or otherwise you're going to get hurt like these guys are, so don't even try it. So we go on and we have John, who is like continuing to talk to Ray, and Ray is to mention that he's going to be in prison for 8 years, and John's like, "What? 8 years? Like, I thought you told me 8 years." So he cuts a hole with his nail and pops this thing, and he's like, 8 years? And the guy's Ray's like, "Yeah, but hey, like, wait, because like John at this point is gonna break out of this prison and leave, and they're like, and Ray's like, wait, they're gonna need you. Like, don't go and like, don't run out of here just yet." And John is like, well, like, I thought going to prison they would immediately need me. They would desperately want me, and so Ray's like, not yet. Wait it out. So the longer and longer we go about this, the more Ray here is trying to convince just John to like, well, hey, like, here's when you go through these new scenarios, like when you try to like fly and then you land, like make sure you try not to like destroy a car or hurt people, or like make sure like you know where you're landing, and also when you see a bunch of cops around, like tell them that they're all doing a good job. Like, hey, Mr. Officer, I get that you have a bulletproof vest. I don't need to wear one of those because I'm bulletproof. So, like you're better at me. Like, good job, good job. So we go on and we have John, who stays more and more into this prison, and at one point we have this basketball coming into John's hands because these guys were playing basketball and the ball gets away from him. So John ends up going and chucking this ball by this basket, and the ball bounces out and bounces out of the prison. So John flies after it and realizes, like, like, should I escape right now? Should I just leave? Like, and he has that thought process, but he decides to fly back into the prison. And so, like, okay, all right. Like, it seems like this guy isn't going to fly out of here from the Maria Loma detention center. Sure. So we have at one point where John is to be getting a phone call, and one of the prison guards is to wake him up while he's sleeping, and John's like, leave a message, and the guard's like, no, like this is coming from like, I think the mayor or some like police officer somewhere. So John now is to shave his face with his own fingers and uh and go off to see what they want, and now they want him released so they can go and help him with this bank robbery. So evidently these robbers here, one of them of course being Red, is to have a number of guys that are to have some heavy artillery here, some kind of armor piercing round kind of things. So we of course have this this police sergeant who is going and telling John kind of the layout of how kind of well armed these guys are, and that there is a police officer, a female police officer, that is to be kind of caught in the middle of this, and they want John to rescue her. So John, of course, is wearing his kind of like his new shades and his leathered outfit, where John, of course, told Ray, it's like, I will fight naked before I fight in that. And Ray's like, well, we've already seen that. It's on YouTube. So John is, of course, to go and kind of make his way to this female. And so John, of course, is being this kind of very awkward guy now. And so he's asking this girl, it's like, do I have permission to touch your body? He's like, yeah, like, get me the heck out of here. And he's like, I'm sorry, like, you're a very attractive woman, like, I'm not, like, having an effect. And she's like, just get me out of here. And so John goes and, like, picks this girl up and then kind of puts the car and is holding the car and kind of taking it to where, like, the car is shielding both of them. And it gets to the point where John can go and safely hand off this police officer. And so John turns around because his sergeant is saying, like, hey, John. And so he's like, huh? And he's like, good job. Like, he's like, no, like, you need to go and end this. You've already said that already. So John goes in there, flies in there, and starts scooping up a lot of the bad guys. And so all of a sudden now Red is left here. And he is to have a dead man switch that has him kind of hold on to this thing, and if he is to let go, kaboom! Because all of these hostages are all wearing these bombs strapped to their body. I'm like, you know what? Never really understood that about like action films where they have a perfect number of just bombs for everyone in this bank. Like, look at Swordfish. Swordfish doesn't make sense to me either. It's just like they have like a bunch of people having, like, I guess a ton of money to make all these bomb vests, and I don't get it. But I guess it's just a cool action sequence that seems unique. So now, since Red is to realize that all of his men are now gone, Red is telling John, it's like, well, since all of my men are gone, you're going to go in here and break into this vault and pull out $30 million and just fly me out of here. And John's like, whoa, that's a lot of money. But John's like, well, you know what? No, like, I've really gone on to, like, turn over a new leaf here. So that's going to be a no. So we start, of course, having this bank robber again calling John an a-hole. And so John's like, man, I really don't like that word. So we go on and we have John taking a part from some lamp and crushing it down. And then he starts using his nail to carve up this piece. And so we, of course, have this guy who goes in the secret number that John is to just get so irritated with this guy. So we now have John appearing out of this bank with this hand now chopped off, and we, of course, have John giving this sergeant this hand of this dead man switch to hold on to, while all these hostages are now running out of this building. So we end up later having Red and those two other men that John was to humiliate. Red was to go on and try to mention, it's like, well, hey, like this guy took something from you, and you guys are going to get your power back. You guys are going to get even with this guy, and I'm going to help you. So they end up going and breaking out of prison and trying to hunt John down here. So John is again like good jobbing everybody after he leaves this bank, and so like we have, of course, a sergeant that is telling John, like, oh, you, good job. Like, what goofy thing that John is just laying out here. So after this moment, we now have really just Ray celebrating this whole thing, realizing how desperate everyone's going to be to either want to sponsor John or look at some kind of deals with John, and they're going to have to go through Ray to do any of it. So John, Mary, and Ray are going to this diner, this restaurant. I don't know what it's called because I couldn't have been bothered, and for once. And so we have these two kind of company guys called Mike and Jeremy, who are like looking at John, and they're like, yeah, like we want to like work with him, we want to sponsor him. And so they're going through Ray and asking him like, hey man, like where have you been? And Ray's like, oh well, I've been calling your company, like, and you guys haven't been answering my calls. And like, oh man, like that's a whole thing of the past. Like, come on, buddy, we're gonna schedule you. We're gonna give you an appointment and just kind of like like eventually try to like see if they can kind of work with John, because that's all they care about. And they don't care about this all heart campaign. They don't give a about that. They just want uh, him really just for them to see how they can sponsor John or make a video game out of him or something like that. So John, Ray, and Mary are at this dinner, and so Ray is going on and telling the story of how he met Mary, where Ray had just lost his wife because she had given birth to Aaron and then she had died. So Ray at some point was at this grocery store and he's looking through these diapers and his mind is just gone. And all of a sudden we have Mary coming in like an angel to rescue him from his life. And so like Ray is just kissing on Mary and just so grateful. And so but now Ray wants to hear John's story about like how like he got to be here, whether it was uh from some rocket from another planet, uh or maybe he was experimented on from a government hospital somewhere. And so John was going on and saying that he was to be found in some hospital and he doesn't remember anything. He has amnesia. And evidently he had fractured his skull and couldn't remember anything. And so all of a sudden he slowly but surely healed from all of his wounds. And all the doctors wanted to hear his story, but he had no clue of anything about what had happened. And so the one thing that John is to like tell us here that he's like, man, like how bad of a person was I before when no one came to claim me? No one knew who I was. And so when a woman was tasked like, well, hey, can I get your John Hancock? We had John who just naturally assumed that's what his name was. And so it's like, oh, that's how we came up with the name. So yeah, so Ray goes so Mary is kind of very teary-eyed and is to apologize to John, like saying that like she's sorry, and she's getting very emotional because there's a reason by that. So John goes on and is to go and kind of toss Ray over his shoulder and then put Ray into his bed because of course he's drunk. And so Ray's making a bunch of jokes like, oh, like, hey, don't take anything off more than my shoes, or like, hey, John's put me to bed. So, but John is kind of promising, or Ray is kind of promising John that they're going to do great things together. So John goes down and is, of course, seeing Mary, and all of a sudden, this leads to them just kind of looking at one another. And John kisses Mary, and she doesn't stop him, she doesn't prevent him from doing this. And so all of a sudden, Mary goes and takes John and chucks him out this house, leaving a big, massive hole in this wall. And so now Mary is telling John that you better not tell Ray about any of this. And John's like, what? Like, he's baffled. He's confused. He doesn't remember anything. So the very next day, John heads back to this house looking for answers. And so Mary is to go and find her refrigerator outside of her house. And so Ray is to go on and get up and just get breakfast. And Mary's mentioning that they're wanting to go on vacation right now to like a far off place like Australia or something like that. And so, because that's kind of what the magazine was saying. And so Ray's like, seriously, right now, just give everything up and just go on a vacation. And so Mary's like, yeah, let's go. So John ends up showing up, and so Mary's to make up this story about John sneezing and a chew, and he sneezed and he blasted his way through this wall. And so John is mentioning when he arrives there, he's like, yeah, like I get really really sneezy when there's dust in the air, or I get really surprised by something. So Ray leaves, and so now like John is going and using all these kind of weird kitchen utensils to just like stab into Mary or smack her, or just kind of like figure out a way for her to eventually want John to stop, to just be like, okay, what do you want? So, because we have like John stabbing her with like this one, it looks like a thing you would use mostly for like grilling, but I guess I'm wrong about that. And then he goes and has this roller, and he cracks her off to the side of the head, and then he starts grabbing these pots. So Murray's like, what do you want? And John's like, I want answers. And so Mary's like, okay, well, we'll meet at your place and at X amount of time. So John goes back to his trailer, and so go there, and she's like, come on, like, get on with it. Like, you're going to ask me a number of questions, and I'm going to give you these answers, and then you're going to get out of my life. You're going to go somewhere else. You're going to live somewhere else away from me. So John, of course, is asking Mary, who are we to one another? And so Mary's saying that they're brother and sister, and John's like, wrong. So Mary's to mention that they were, of course, angels or gods, and now they're superheroes. And so John, when he was talking to Ray and Mary, that his whole story was to never get to some newspaper, because Ray never had heard of that story because it was like 80 years ago. And the only thing that John had on him was 2 tickets to the Boris Karloff Frankenstein movie, and $20 or something like that. So, and John eventually had kept that. So Mary's to mention how like immoral they are, but once they are to be put into pairs, eventually they realize that they can, when they get close to one another, become mortal and then decide to die. Hence why there's very few of them left. So So Mary is to mention that John and her like used to be a couple, but it seems that every single time they were to go after John through her, and so John now is to eventually find out that at some point Mary and him were lovers. And so it seems that Mary isn't giving John still enough answers, and so he goes and flies off to tell Ray the truth because that is the one thing that she does not want. So John flies off and Mary flies off after him, and now we have this big massive battle because Mary is to tell John that she's way stronger than him. And so he's like, "Oh, it's like that, huh?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's like that." So we have John and Mary now at the I think it's the Hollywood Boulevard, kind of just fighting it out. And uh, yeah, the corner of Hollywood Boulevard and Highland Avenue. So we go on here and we have both of these characters where Mary is to put on these sunglasses, I guess, thinking that she can hide her identity because I guess it worked so well for Superman, right? So Mary is to mention that she has a life now, and like she no longer wants to be with John, and supposedly it's physics that every time she is to try to get further and further away from John, they eventually continue to find one another. It's this weird physics thing. So we now have, of course, John going on and calling Mary crazy, and Mary's like, "Don't call me crazy." And so John is like, "Cuckoo." And so, like, I guess that's her trigger word. So Mary goes on and chucks a truck on John, and so now they're just fighting it out. They're fighting it out, and it seems to cause this almost like a tornado of a thing going on here because it seems that Mary has this kind of weather like power, and so like oddly, or I guess just these two being here together using their power causes this kind of weird weather situation here. It's kind of odd. So John and Mary are to fly through this building. Weirdly enough, this building just so happens to coincide with Ray delivering this kind of pitch to these guys to do this All Hard campaign, and these guys have no interest. We ended up having before Ray was going on and telling these guys and kind of boasting about he had with these kind of drug executives. He was mentioning like, "Oh, we have like my company has this soccer team that's being sponsored," and the guys are just like, "Well, like what soccer team? Like, is it like what?" It's so like Ray just mentioned it's like, "Oh, it's my kid's soccer team." It's like, okay. So Ray is to make a couple of these mock designs that can just be displayed in a number of locations, photoshopped and whatever. So Ray is going to fail at another meeting, but what he is to also fail at is to realize that maybe his wife is weirdly slipping away from him. So, because Mary is to tell John that she hates him, and John is to tell Mary that he's sorry. Like he doesn't know what he did before. He doesn't know who he was before, but whatever he did, he's sorry. And so all of a sudden Ray is now watching this scene unfold, and Mary's to realize that the jig is up technically. So now Mary has to explain to Ray that she's basically like John. And Ray's like, "Wait a minute. Like, isn't that something you should have told me on the first date? It's like, well, hey, uh, I'm an immortal. Like, shouldn't you have told me that? And Mary's just like, well, uh, we're designed in pairs, and that eventually, once we are to get paired up together, we are to become mortals. And but that John was always meant to re-find me, no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried to get rid of him. Like it just so Ray is just like, well, like okay, I guess, this is just it now. So we have kind of like John butting in here, and Ray is just kind of like, well, hey man, like hold your horses. And so like it gets to the point where just John just decides that he's just gonna leave. Like he doesn't want any. I guess he can't really be a part of this conversation, and so he just goes off, and he has to start getting booze and just probably become that same exact John that was to be in the beginning of this film. And so all of a sudden, this convenience store clerk is to mention that the total comes to 91.10. And so John is like, wait a minute, like not the price of this stuff. Like you're overpricing me. So the clerk is to put his finger over the zero to realize 911. And so he's kind of like looking over at the two guys holding a gun to him. So John grabs one of the guys through this wood counter and pulls him out and chucks him into uh, one of these glass fridges, and that kind of holds all the beverages and whatever. I never knew exactly what they were called. So the other guy is to grab the store clerk and to hold him up. So Jonah's like, you know what? Like, I get what you're doing here. Like, I get it. And so we now have John mentioning it's like, well, how about like we kind of do like a standoff here, like your gun against my Zargnut. So John goes and he, of course, takes out this guy and pushes him through this window with his candy bar. And so John tells the convenience store clerk, hey man, sorry about your window. But then he realizes that he's shot and he falls over and he makes it to the hospital where, of course, Mary is at. So Mary tells John once she arrives at this hospital, once John is to be filled with holes, so to speak, Mary's to mention John that every time they're closer and closer together, the more mortal they become. And so there's this one injury that he had gotten where there were guys with these swords and they stabbed into him. And there was another time where John got injured and got burnt getting Mary out of this fire and had the scar from that. And the theater thing was them going to the movies, and eventually there were attackers there going and taking out them there. Every single time they used Mary to get to John, and so that's why finally Mary was trying to break this cycle. So all of a sudden now we have Red and his goons making his way to this hospital, realizing that now John, for whatever weird reason, is now wounded. So Ray is going on and dealing with a bunch of press. They're all asking if this is some weird, unique bullet. And Ray's like, no, 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 no. Like, this is just some unique circumstance, and so on. And so he's just, like, knowing everybody and walking into the hospital. And they're talking about the Superwoman and so on. And so and he's like, whatever. So Ray makes it into the hospital. And so once these guys start firing off these rounds, and Mary is to get shot in the crossfire, everybody's starting to scramble to keep Mary alive. And so John, who finds both Ray and Aaron there, goes and drops this Dasani vending machine and kind of pushes it in front of them for them to eventually uh, kind of be safe behind this vending machine. And so John starts tearing through all these guys and chucking them out these windows for them to fall to their deaths. And so now we have Ray that is starting to fire bullets into John, and so it's like, well, John, uh, like you had a good ride, but like now it's over. So John continues to get rid of bullets until he drops, and so Red is telling John, it's like, yeah, everyone's gonna miss you. So now they're looking at John, they're kind of checking that he's still alive, and both Mary and John are to be assumed dead right now. But then weirdly, all of a sudden, I guess since Mary is now dead, that kind of separates the bond between them, which has now John have the ability to, I guess, heal quicker, I guess, than Mary, because she's been dead technically longer than he was. So John now starts to, of course, fly out of the, or kind of jump out of the building and jump further away from this building, because we technically had we technically had Ray who took care of Red, where Ray was to go and chop off Red's other hand and then to take this guy out with this axe. And so John is to go on again and again, pushing himself further and further from this building, having Mary come back to life and to start having a pulse, and is probably going to heal all of her wounds. So now we go on and have a month passing where now John, of course, is to call Ray, and Ray's like, hey man, where you been? And he's like, well, hey, I'm sorry, my phone was out of range. Because we end up finding out that I guess John had went to the moon and painted the moon to look like the all heart symbol. And so John is telling Ray that, like, hey man, we're going to do big things. We're going to change the world. And so Ray is looking up at this moon after he's done consistently asking Mary about all of the famous people and like what they were like, and she was mentioning like, oh, this person's needy, and oh, this person was this, and so because they have lived a life since like 4 BC to I guess 1928 is when John was to lose his memory. And so I guess that ballpark of time, like Mary has been alive since whatever this movie was shot, 2008. So like they've had quite a decades of knowing a lot of things. So, but Mary goes on, and when Ray asks about JFK, we of course have Mary's like, JFK, and Ray's like, what? Like what are you talking about? And so Mary's like, well, like I don't know much about JFK because I was dealing with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it's like, oh, okay. So again, John is calling Ray to let him know that they're going to make some big changes, and they're going to save the world. And the moon is to have the all heart logo on it. And Ray is asking Mary now, it's like, well, am I going to get in trouble for that? Like, is somebody going to, like, am I going to jail for that? But yeah, so we go on and we have the movie wrap up with a happy ending. But we end up, I think, having an end credit scene where we, of course, have a thug that is kind of doing some crime, and John shows up and he's like, "Hey, hand job," this and that, and so John is like, "Well, hey, that's not my name," and so this guy continues to insult him, and so we eventually had this guy going and calling him some kind of name again, and John is like, "Call me that one more time," and then that's when the scene just ends. So with that said, I think I'm going to end that here. I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.